A costing version must be selected to run a specified BOM calculation. After running the calculation, you can view and analyze the calculation results by using the summary and complete functions in the item price form. Let's discuss costing versions in a little more detail. The costing version setup form enables you to create and configure distinct user-defined environments for maintaining and calculating item planned costs. You can enter and maintain item costs, cost categories, and indirect costs, and ratios in costing versions. The BOM calculation executed on the costing version calculates and appends the manufactured item's planned costs. The costs are created with the status of pending and can be activated discretely or en masse. To become effective and applied to production costing and inventory evaluation, the prices must be activated. Attributes on costing versions enable constraints of content and cost calculations in that version. Items cost in a costing version can be analyzed and maintained individually or for each costing version. Active cost history is kept with the full details. Costing versions are used to maintain a collection of cost and cost prices. The costing version configuration lets you constrain and check the cost or price maintained and regulates the BOM calculation in the costing version. A costing version can contain a set of standard cost records or a set of planned cost records that are based on the costing type that is assigned to the costing version. The first type is a standard cost. This is a costing version whose configuration is constrained for the maintenance and calculation of a standard cost. This is determined by the item model group that is linked to a particular item. Next is planned costs. This is a configurable costing version for the maintenance of planned costs, which can be used for simulation purpose or as a default cost under a non-standard costing methodology such as FIFO, LIFO, or weighted average. A third option exists for conversion costs. This is a special costing version used for converting an item from a non-standard costing method to the standard cost costing method. Let's switch over to AX and I'll show you how to create some costing versions. Costing versions are found in Inventory Management, underneath Setup, and then Costing Versions. When you use standard cost as your costing methodology for your items, which is determined by the item model group, it's important to note that at least one costing version must be configured. We'll go ahead and create a new costing version by clicking the new icon and giving it a name. First, you'll want to select whether it's a planned cost, a standard cost, or a conversion. I'll select standard cost for our example. I'll call it 2014 cost. And give it a description. The next two fields are used to block the costing version. If you set the block field to yes, then no additional costs or prices can be entered into this costing version. This is useful when you want to end or deactivate a particular costing version because it's no longer valid. We'll leave this as no. Next is the block activation. This setting allows you to prevent a cost price from being activated from inside of a particular costing version. If the activation is blocked, you can still create transactions and new prices and costs inside of that version as long as the block field is set to no. I'm going to switch this to no so that we'll be able to activate prices. You'll notice that when I did this, the Activate button became enabled for our costing version. The last two fields are view only and will indicate when the costing version was last activated and last modified. Next, let's go over to the General tab. Here you can see the same basic information that's displayed on the Overview tab. We'll click the Recording tab, and here you can enter and specify some additional information. The first thing you can do is type a from date. When you enter a from date into the costing version, you're basically saying that the lines of the costing version cannot have a date on the activation that's prior to the date you've specified here. You can also specify a site. When you specify a site, that site value will be defaulted into the lines for the cost prices and sales prices that you might be configuring. If you leave these values blank, then there are no restrictions. On the bottom, you can see whether or not there are recording restrictions, whether or not the prices should include in the unit price, and whether or not you want to use rounding. On the right-hand side, you can see there are 3 checkboxes to indicate which types of prices you want to allow. If this particular costing version is only for cost prices, then you'll want to clear the checkboxes for purchase prices and sales prices. Oftentimes, different users are responsible for maintaining cost prices versus purchase and sales prices, so you may want to consider using 3 different costing versions to those respective price types. Next, on the Calculation tab, you can see how BOM calculations will work. There are checkboxes to indicate whether or not you can run calculations for productions and purchased items. Additional settings are configured here. However, depending on where you run the calculation from, they will not be able to be modified. These settings come from the cost groups that we configured earlier and are set on either the inventory management parameters or on the individual items. You can also set a fallback principle. The fallback principle is used when an item cost price cannot be found to tell the system where to look next to find the item purchase price. If it's set to none and an item purchase price cannot be found, then the warnings that are configured on the cost group will be presented to the user. If you select the active option, AX will look for an active cost price for those BOM components. If you select the costing version option, then you can specify a specific costing version that has other prices. This can be useful if you want the system to fall back to a planned costing version where you're trying to simulate a particular scenario. For our example, I'm going to set this to active. The next setting is for your profit settings. By default, this will be set to standard. However, if you wanted to apply profit setting 1 or 2, you can select that from the drop-down box. Then when you run calculations from this costing version, they will automatically default to the profit setting that's configured on your costing groups for each individual item. Now that you've created the costing version, you can start to enter prices into it. This can be done manually or by performing a calculation. Let's use the price button first and enter in an item price. Here in the screen, you'll notice that it's split into 2 separate tabs. We have the Pending Prices tab and the Active Prices tab. Because we just created this costing version, there are no active prices yet. We'll need to create some new pending prices on the Pending Prices tab. You'll notice when you're on the Active Prices tab, all of the buttons are disabled. However, when you go back to the Pending Prices tab, all of the buttons become enabled. Certain buttons are disabled depending on what type of item you select. So let's go ahead and add some prices. I'll click the item number drop-down box and select the item that I want to configure a price for. In the price type field, it has defaulted to cost. You can select the purchase price or sales price. However, I configured this particular costing version to only allow cost. So selecting purchase or sales price will result in an error. Next, I'll want to select the site. Then, in the price field, I can type in the price for this particular item in that particular site. You can also add price charges and price quantities. The price quantity is applied to the price charges. So if I wanted to add an additional $10 for every 1,000 items that we purchase, I would type 10 into the price charges and 1,000 into the price quantity. The price unit field will always default to 1, which indicates that the price I've specified is for 1 unit of the particular item. You can see the unit on the far right-hand side in the unit field. When you add price charges and price quantities, you'll notice the Include in Unit Price checkbox. If this checkbox is selected, the additional the additional $10 will automatically be added into the unit price of these items. You can also specify a from date. If this price is to be effective on the 1st of next month, I would go ahead and change this date. I'll leave it as today's date for now. If you go over to the General tab, here you can see the basic information. You'll also notice the blocked and calculated checkboxes. This will indicate if this particular cost price is blocked or if it came from a calculation. Because we manually created this line, it is not calculated. The last tab is the Dimensions tab. It's important to specify dimensions. Depending on the storage dimension group and tracking dimension group that is linked to your particular item, additional inventory dimensions may be required. Let's go back to the Overview tab. Next, I'll show you how we can run a calculation. In this example, I manually added the item. I'll go ahead and click the Calculation button this time to calculate an item cost. You can see that when you use the Calculate button from this form, it will select the item number that you have created for this particular record. In this case, this item is a purchased item. So by calculating the cost, AX will search for any other indirect costs that might be available in the system. If I want to overwrite the particular amount, I can select the Overwrite option or the Missing Only option. I'll close this window and show you the other way that we can calculate a cost price. We'll close the window and go back to the costing version setup screen where we created our costing version. Here you'll notice a calculation button. This is the button that is typically used to run a mass calculation. If I had created 50 new items and need to run a BOM calculation for all of them, I can use this screen to do it. You'll select the site, enter the calculation date, select what type of cost prices and orders you want to calculate, indicate whether or not you want to update and overwrite or only insert the missing costs, and if you want to use the Where Used update. Over on the right, you'll notice the Select button. When you run this process, you'll want to be careful. If you do not use the Select button, you're running a calculation for every item in your entire system. So typically, you'll want to use this Select button to filter the criteria down. For example, you might add a filter for a specific cost group or calculation group by clicking the Add button and then selecting the field from the item table that you want to filter by. Then, in the criteria column, you can enter the information, such as M5. We did not link the cost group M5 to any items, so this won't return any results. I'll clear that out and click OK. Next, on the price recording inversion, you can select whether or not you want to record cost prices and charges. The Warnings tab has the settings that come from the cost versioning setup. If you want to override that setup, you can mark the checkbox and then select the individual options that you want. 2 additional options are also available to identify missing updates and display whether or not the fallback data is being used. When you're doing this for a large quantity of items, you'll want to consider using the Batch Processing tab to send this job to the batch server so that it doesn't take all the resources on your local computer. When you're ready, you'll click OK. In my case, this price calculation job is added into the batch queue. What I'm going to do next is show you how we can run a BOM calculation from the Released Products form. So I'll switch over to Product Information Management and open up the Released Products form. I'll select an item that I want to run a calculation for, and then on the Manage Cost tab, I'll click the Item Price button. This will open up the same screen that we were looking at earlier. By default, when you open this form from the Released Products form, you'll automatically be on the Active Prices tab, so you can see that currently the price is $269.48. If you go to the Pending Prices tab, you can see whether or not prices are pending. You could optionally manually add a line and type in the price. However, I'm going to run a calculation for just this one item. I'll select the costing version I want to do this with, so I'll use the new 2014 cost version I just created, and select the BOM version I want to use. I can also update the quantity. So let's say I want to calculate this based on producing 100 of this particular item. I'll switch this to production order, and I'll need to reselect the BOM. I'll go ahead and click OK, and now AX will calculate the price based on the current settings. You'll notice that some of these items in my bill of material have a warning or error message. So I can review these warnings and error messages and take action. You can see that the price has been calculated as $392.95. If I want to review the details of this, I can use the Summary button. The Summary button will show you the breakdown of the costs by each of the cost groups for the components that are inside of it. So here you can see the costs for assembly and polishing. The M groups are for the items, so you can see here the electronic components, cabinets, miscellaneous, and items that have no costing sheet. If you want to see the complete details, you can use the Complete button to see line by line each item with its cost. So here you can see the full breakdown of all of the BOM components and all of the labor that's included in this particular BOM calculation and how much the cost is. If I'm happy with the cost calculation and all of the cost prices for the components are up to date, I can go ahead and activate this by using the Activate button. When you're doing this in mass, you can also use the Activate function from the costing version. I'm going to activate this for just this one particular item, just for time's sake. Once the price is activated, you'll notice that it disappears from the Pending Prices tab, and now it will appear on the Active Prices tab. Here you can see the new cost that we just activated for that particular site. Now that we've taken a look at how to set up BOM calculations and costing versions, we'll talk a little bit more about the explosion mode in our next lesson.